in pursuit of health and wisdom. Sapio with Buck Joffrey.
Welcome back to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. This is Buck Joffrey, and I am here today with Susan Jackson. Dr. Susan Jackson, she's a renowned psychologist, author, celebrated for pioneering work on the psychological concept of flow. Her expertise includes high-performance psychology, consulting, academic research, writing, and flow experience assessment. With a PhD in sports and exercise psychology, Sue has extensive experience in sports, performance, and health industries. She's co-authored Flow in Sports, which was instrumental in bringing an understanding of flow to athletes and coaches. In experiencing flow, Sue shares practical strategies for achieving optimal experiences and unlocking human potential across various domains, solidifying her as a leading voice in the field. Welcome, Sue. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Buck?
Good. And Sue, you're coming to us from Australia, and I appreciate it. Got you nice and early there. It's 7:30 a.m. and it's 2:30 Pacific time here. So let's start out. Now, this is kind of an interesting topic because it's not necessarily related specifically to longevity, but there is a performance element. We have a lot of people who are athletes who listen to this show. So why don't we, we've sort of, I think, anecdotally, people have heard, the idea of flow, but maybe since you've kind of obviously done your whole career based on this, you could give us a more formal definition of what exactly flow state is.
Yeah, sure. And just to preempt that, in terms of longevity, one of the key arguments that Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who founded the flow concept, had about why flow is important is that it contributes to quality of life. So it enhances the quality of our experience, and that matters in the long run.
Sure.
In terms of, are we experiencing stress, or are we being bored, or are we experiencing flow? And definitely, as you said, flow is very tied into performance, and we tend to perform at our best in flow. However, equally, if not more important, is how flow can positively shape the quality of our life.
Sure.
And in that respect, maybe it has some indirect benefits in terms of longevity, perhaps not as long as we live, but what the quality of that life is that we do have.
Yeah, and also I think general health span and happiness and, all those types of things as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So that just wanted to make that make that comment when you were mentioning about flow and its relevance and so on. And in terms of what is flow, well, flow is an optimal psychological state when you're totally focused on what you're doing. And you are so focused that the state of attention becomes effortless because you bring all of yourself to what you're doing, and you let go of what we often are dragging along with us, which is self-consciousness about fear of others' evaluations. How are we doing? Is this good enough? And am I succeeding or whatever? And so you let go of all of that. And that's one of the dimensions of flow, is that loss of self-consciousness and becoming very immersed in what you're doing. And then that tends to then lead to the enjoyment afterwards, if not during. Afterwards, we reflect back and think, wow, I was really engaged in that activity, in that performance, in that task. And yes, I did well. And also, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. So what's kind of happening in your brain when you are in that, that actual flow state?
And well, that's a very interesting question. And there are researchers looking at that. And it's a difficult one to give a very specific answer to, because you can't manufacture flow. You can't just say, okay, well, or most people can't say, okay, I'm just going to step into flow now, so hook me up and let's see what's happening in my brain. There are some activities where it's more conducive to be in a type of lab type of setting, experimental setting, where brain activity can be assessed. And that is the area of computer gaming. And because you don't have to be moving too much when you're gaming, and you are very focused and you're doing a contained activity. So that happens to be an area where there is some research looking at flow experience. There's also attempts to look at what's happening in the brain more in situ, and as technology improves, wireless technology and so on, and technology that's not going to interfere with what you're doing, then I think we'll learn more. But I think at a very basic level, we turn off those areas of the brain that have to do with self-reflective processing about what I was saying before about how am I doing this well, and so on. And we bring in the parts of our brain that are about attentional focusing on a specific task, on a specific challenge.
So obviously, you mentioned gaming. In sports, I mean, is it sort of by definition that, professional athletes are going to be in flow? I mean, or is there, you know what I mean? Like, it's a little bit hard to kind of grasp.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of get it because I think all of us have experienced flow at some point, and you know what that means. You just kind of are absorbed in something, and hours go by, and you didn't notice. I mean, back when I was a surgeon, that used to happen to me, and people wondered how people were doing 8-hour surgery, and it's like, well, I don't know. It didn't seem like 8 hours.
That's
right.
That's exact classic illustration of flow. And one of the dimensions of flow and being in flow at a very deep level is that loss of sense of the normal passing of time. So time seems to either speed up or slow down depending on the task demand. So yes, and interestingly, Buck, when Csikszentmihalyi High first started looking at flow, well, the first cohort of people that he looked at flow, or creativity in, was how he got interested in flow. He was looking at painters and how they'd get immersed in what they were doing. And then he went on to look at surgeons and rock climbers and musicians and chess players, so quite different activities. And what he found was this consistency in when you got totally absorbed, that experience was very similar. So it had things like the loss of self-consciousness, the transformation of time, the total focus on what you're doing, the sense of enjoying it. So yes, I started looking at flow in sport, and have since broadened beyond sport to other activities. And sport is conducive to flow. But to answer your original question, no, I don't think that professional athletes get into flow all the time or even a lot. I think there are classic examples of athletes that we can say, wow, they really look like they're on flow in the court or on the field and so on. But it's not an easy state for most of us to achieve. I think there's a number of factors that make it quite challenging to get there.
I guess that's the next question I would have is, there's such a powerful benefit to be in flow. And I guess the elements that I think of is they have to be things that you actually enjoy, for one thing. It's hard to be it would be hard to be in flow with something that you're not interested in. And also, it's something that generally that is gives itself to being in flow, right? I mean, there's certain activities that probably are harder to be in flow.
True.
And so the question I guess I have is, if it's good and you can, if you access it, you can do things with it. How do you? Is there a way for us to actually get into it rather than just be in it? Like, I mean, rather than just say, "Hey, I was in flow." Is there ways that we can artificially, make ourselves or practice flow?
Yeah, definitely there are some psychological skills that we can develop that enhance our ability to get into flow. And I think that most people can relate to times when they were in flow. And definitely when I first started reading about flow, I'm like, oh, wow, there's somebody actually putting a language, giving words to this experience that I've had that I thought was just random.
Oh,
It
by the
just
way,
happened
when
on
did
that
you
day.
have it? When in what context?
As an athlete,
Okay.
and also as a young child, I really got immersed in reading fiction books, and I
Right.
just spent hours and hours reading books. And so those were the two areas. And then definitely through a number of different sports, I would experience it, but I didn't seem to have any control over whether I experienced it. And it was only on starting to read Csikszentmihalyi's works on flow that I realized that it's actually a psychological state, that we do have some degree of control over whether or not we experience it. It's certainly not something we can just flick a switch and say, okay, now I'm in flow. However, that's not impossible either, but you'd have to spend a lot of time getting to that place. But some simple things that everyone can do is get the challenge skill balance right in an activity. There's a very simple flow model which has a challenge axis on the vertical axis and a skill axis on the horizontal axis. And if we can get ourselves into a challenging situation that we have the skills and we believe we have the skills to meet, that sets the stage for flow. And if we don't provide ourselves with that challenging situation, we're not going to experience flow. So for you, you experienced it in a very challenging setting, doing
Right.
surgery.
Right. And the other time I would say is that, like you, I remember in college sometimes, one thing I remember specifically is sometimes I would start reading and I would be in kind of a bad mood, and I would get into the flow and I would get out of the flow, and all of a sudden there was almost like an endorphin type rush when I was done. I was in a good mood when I came out of flow. It's always is that a real thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that a
Absolutely.
physiological phenomena of like endorphin related? Can you comment on that?
I think
Yeah.
so, definitely, and probably more so when you're doing something physical.
Yeah.
So, for example, there's this idea that runners experience runner's high, which has a lot to do with endorphin release. And you'd wonder, well, how are we actually getting an endorphin release if we're being still reading? But I think it has to do with the fact that we bring all of our attentional resources to that activity
Yeah.
and we engage in it, and then we come out of it and we're like, wow, that was a great experience to be fully focused. And and I think one of the reasons that we don't experience a lot of flow is that there are so many distractions in life. There are so many ways in which we can easily distract ourselves. And technology is a wonderful thing, and it's allowing us to talk from different sides of the world in different time zones right now. And technology also provides many challenges because we're always greeted with something else to take our attention over here or over here rather than here. And so developing to return to how do we actually enhance our ability to experience flow, developing our ability to stay focused on one thing rather than going through our day allowing ourselves to be distracted. Because if we do that, what we're doing is we're training ourselves to be distracted. We're training ourselves to, oh, there's that next stimulus, I'm going to go to that next stimulus. If you did that while you're doing a surgical operation, that'd be pretty bad for the patient, wouldn't it?
Right.
So yeah, it's learning to stay focused on the one thing. And how do we do that? Well, one of the great ways that we can do that that's very accessible to everyone is through meditation or mindfulness, because
Yeah.
mindfulness teaches us where our attention is, and it also gives us ways of bringing our attention back to the present.
So mindfulness meditation in particular, basically focusing on your breath, that kind of thing, right? So I was actually, it's
yeah.
interesting when you were talking about flow, a lot of the concepts that you were bringing up reminded me very much of, the concepts behind mindfulness meditation. It's sort of being in the moment, right? Being there rather than somewhere else. And so in that regard, I guess the question is like, what is the difference between mindfulness and flow?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And in my latest book, Experiencing Flow, I've got a few chapters devoted to the relationships between mindfulness and flow. And I see mindfulness as a pathway to flow. Mindfulness is about noticing where our attention is and then making a conscious decision to bring our attention back to the present moment. and to do that without bringing judgment to what we're doing, because once we start judging how well we're bringing our attention back, obviously we're no longer fully in the present, and we're getting further away from flow. And so that is actually drawn from John Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness. Flow, I think, is a next level of awareness and such focus, concentration on a very limited stimulus field. We're not letting everything come into awareness and just be with it. We're deciding we're going to focus all of our attentional resources on the performance in front of us, on the task in front of us. And we then bring a number of skills to it. So because flow by definition only occurs in a challenging situation, there's got to be a number of skills that we bring to that challenge. And therefore there's we're tapping into, it could be technical skills, physical skills, psychological skills. So it's more complex in terms of what the performance, what we're doing, what we're asked to do in flow is more complex than what we're asked to do in a mindfulness practice, for example. So for me, mindfulness is a great way to access flow.
Where can flow be beneficial to people outside of athletics and gaming and surgery? Sort of some practical things in everyday lives, or is this really just sort of a specialized activity?
No, that's actually a really good question that you raised. So again, going back to the founder of Flow, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he examined flow in many different settings in very high-performing, high-achieving individuals. One of the books he wrote was called Creativity, where he interviewed a number of people at the very top of their field, including Nobel Prize winners, and was asking them about their process, their creative process of developing something, learning something, inventing something, and flow was sort of, he could find flow integral to all of those activities. And then he's written a book, Flow in Everyday Life. And so that is more where he's looked at people in different cultures, not just Western culture, people in different cultures doing activities of daily life, and how you can actually find flow in daily life once you understand what flow is. And you understand this idea that find a challenging activity and bring all of your attention to it, and bring all of the necessary skill set to that activity, to that challenge, to meet the challenge, and just be with that activity. And so you can do that as you go through each of your activities in your day. They can be small activities, or they can be very large, important activities. So yes, we can, and this is called microflow. Csikszentmihalyi called this microflow. Mm-hmm. So macroflow is when it's really high challenge and it's requiring all of your abilities to bring to the task, and often results in very high level of performance. And then microflow is more when it's a lower level of challenge, but you're still challenging yourself. You're not allowing yourself to just be bored or distracted. You're deciding that, okay, while I'm cooking this meal, I'm going to bring all of my attention to that activity. And I think some people really do find flow in cooking. Sure. Because it's challenging, and like if it's got many steps to it. Then if you don't stay focused, then one step you make a mistake and it's all gone. So yes, I think that we can experience flow in daily life. I think once we understand, hey, there's this state that we can be in, and it's got this name, it's called being in flow, and there's ways that we can get there. I think it's about awareness, and that was why I wrote my latest book, is to try to bring awareness of flow to people, to realize that yes, this is this experience that we can all have. We can all tap into it. It's not easy, but we can get there. And if we do, we're going to enjoy what we're doing, and also we're going to probably perform better than what we would otherwise.
So, is the big idea for bringing it into your daily life, at the end of the day, is it really about just trying to enjoy life, no matter what activity that you're doing? Is that ultimately like sort
Absolutely.
of the big idea?
Yeah, I think that's key. I think that's key. That gets right back to what we were saying at the start, Buck, that in in terms of that longevity piece. It's like
Right.
ultimately the quality of our experience that as we go through life determines the extent to which we look back on life and say, that was a good life. And so, we can do that moment by moment by just deciding to bring our attention to what we're doing. And then it is more enjoyable, isn't it? Like, it's much more enjoyable to do whatever that activity is, even if it's an activity we'd rather not be doing. If we decide we're going to bring all of our attentional focus to that activity, we'll come away from that activity with a more positive experience than if we were just like, oh, okay, going through the paces, but my mind's somewhere else,
Right. Absolutely. So tell us more about your book. What is it called again? And maybe.
The book's called Experiencing Flow, and the subtitle is Life Beyond Boredom and Anxiety. And it's available worldwide on Amazon. And it was prompted by, I was mentored by Csikszentmihalyi. I had the good fortune to be doing my graduate studies, my master's and PhD in North America, where Csikszentmihalyi was based. And I contacted him, and he very generously got in touch and mentored me. And we wrote a book together called Flow in Sports. And because he also had an interest in sports and had been a rock climber himself as a young person. And Mike Csikszentmihalyi passed in 2021, and I'm just, I feel that there's so much that his concept, that what he brought to the world has to offer us, that I wanted it to be more widely understood. And I think if anyone has come across Csikszentmihalyi's books, they'll resonate with this idea of flow, because he's such an amazing writer and thinker. My book is to try to help continue to foster that legacy that he has built over so many years, and to help people to know that flow is accessible.
Right. Fantastic. Well, fascinating conversation. Is there areas in this space that you're super excited that, sort of emerging areas of research? I'm curious about sort of the neuroscience and stuff like that.
Definitely. I think if we can understand it at that level, at the physiological and the neuropsychological level, that then we'll find other ways to tap into flow, no doubt.
Maybe just put something on your head and get the right brainwaves going.
Yeah, well, possibly, because I'm sure that there is some information there about brainwaves. But I think, until that technology is more accessible, that for the everyday person, well, knowing what brainwaves may not help you as much as knowing that there are some simple things you can do, like find a challenge in the activity and bring your full attention to it, have clear goals in what you're doing. And also another way that helps with flow and the continuation of flow in what you're doing is taking on board feedback as you're going. So listening to the feedback that activity or task is giving you, so that if you are starting to get off track, that you listen to the cues and bring yourself back, so that you keep that attention focused. So I think until the neuroscience is further along, like from the everyday understanding of flow, I think keeping it simple and doing what we can do as individuals to enhance our own ability to access flow, I think that's relevant and important.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the program, Sue, and would love to have you back again sometime.
Well, thank you. It's a really interesting conversation. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, Buck.
Thanks for listening to Sapio with Buck Joffrey. A quick reminder that while I am, in fact, a surgeon, nothing I say should be construed as medical advice. Now, make sure to include your physician in any medical decisions you make. And also, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to show your support with a like, share, or subscribe. Until next time, this is Buck Joffrey for Sapio with Buck Joffrey.